Our scripture passage this morning comes from the book of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. And then there's a plus beside that. Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. Here begins that reading. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they could go and anoint Jesus' body, Jesus' dead body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they came to the tomb. They were saying to each other, "Who's going to roll the stone away from the entrance for us?" And when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, and it was a very large stone. Going into the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe seated on the right side, and they were startled. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He isn't here. Look, here's the place where they laid him. Go, tell his disciples, especially Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you." Overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Why did Mark end the story that way? Or did Mark end the story that way? Maybe you've read a little further in your Bibles after verse 9 to see if that is really how one of the apostles left the story of the resurrection. I sure wouldn't blame you if you did. There has to be something more. The story can't end this way. It just can't. And as we see when we do read on, that it doesn't. Someone or ones, most probably not Mark, wrote not one but two additional endings to Mark's version of the story. Why do you suppose they did that? Perhaps the early scholars, or maybe even one of the other apostles, wanted a happy ending. The longer and definitely the more interesting ending appears in the King James Version of the Bible as verses 9 through 20 without any break, suggesting that the last verses had been there all along. Allow me to read those additional verses, beginning back with verse 7, where the angel is still talking. Go, tell his disciples, especially Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you. Overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. After Jesus rose up early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and reported to the ones who had been with him, who were mourning and weeping. But even after they heard the news, they didn't believe that Jesus was alive and that Mary had seen him. After that, he appeared in a different form to 2 of them as they were walking along in the countryside. Another familiar story. And when they returned, they reported it to the others, but they still didn't believe them. Finally, he appeared to the 11 while they were eating. Jesus criticized their unbelief and stubbornness because they didn't believe who saw him after he was raised up. He said to them, "Go into the world and proclaim the good news to every creature. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever doesn't believe will be condemned. These signs will be associated with those who believe. They will throw out demons in my name. They will speak in new languages. They will pick up snakes with their hands. If they drink anything poisonous, it will not hurt them. They will place their hands on the sick and they will get well. And after the Lord Jesus spoke to them, he was lifted into heaven and sat down on the right side of God. But they went out and proclaimed the message everywhere. The Lord worked with them, confirming the word by the signs associated with them. That's quite a bit different from the bare bones style of Mark, isn't it? Mark, who didn't even mention the birth of Jesus in his version. Someone who probably lived a few hundred years after Mark decided that this story just could not end this way. And so they wrote those verses, perhaps to properly end the story and to provide additional proclamation. That's preaching to those reading or listening. I think they wanted to make sure that the gospel message, the good news of Jesus Christ, would go on forever, which it has. It really has. But the mystery doesn't end there, for there is still another ending to Mark's telling of the resurrection story. It is a concise ending that efficiently ties up the loose ends. It picks up after verse 8 and says, they, that is the women, not named, the women at the tomb, promptly reported all of the young man's instructions to those who were with Peter. Afterward, through the work of his disciples, Jesus sent out from the east to the west the sacred and undying message of eternal salvation. Amen. So that writer was more to Mark's style, much more abrupt while still hitting the important parts. We know that Mark's was the first gospel written, and it is the shortest of the four. And there is evidence that Matthew and Luke borrowed from Mark's writing. We could see then why Matthew had the genealogy of Joseph, Jesus' earthly father, and special stories like the visitation of the Magi. And Luke included the wonderful story of Mary and Joseph and Mary's Magnificat, her prayer song for God. The story had to start somewhere, and it started with Mark. And Luke and Matthew took Mark's work and added their own particular stories. Perhaps because they thought Mark didn't offer enough. And as we consider these men, the apostles, we realize that they are only humans with certain first or second-hand knowledge and divine inspiration, to be sure. And they were all very interested in telling the stories of Jesus. Even Mark, with that odd ending. Some scholars say that the scroll with Mark's actual ending has been lost for these many centuries. And then some say that the abrupt ending is a rather extreme example of Mark's irony. In other words, maybe Mark meant to leave it that way. Being the first, perhaps he feared the repercussions of the Jews or the Romans if he wrote what he really felt would happen. Maybe he was trying to protect the women or the disciples. So he stopped it right there. Or maybe he wasn't scared at all, and he knew enough about the inner workings of those who followed Jesus that he trusted that those who knew would understand. They would understand And they did get the word out. And some, if not all, of that group of disciples made the several days' journey to Galilee to meet up with the waiting Jesus. Just 2 chapters back from our passage, Mark has Jesus telling his disciples that after he is raised, he will go before them to Galilee. And then the women are reminded of this by the angel at the tomb. And what about these women? These women have traveled with Jesus and the disciples from Galilee all the way to Jerusalem. They witnessed his death, and now they're ready to properly prepare his body for its ritual burial. And one of these women, Mary Magdalene, is included as being at the tomb of Jesus in all 4 Gospels. And we may need reminding that in the patriarchal culture of the first century, which is even more so than the 21st century, it was extraordinary for a woman to be so prominently mentioned in writing or otherwise. This is Mary Magdalene. She didn't shy away from much. And here she is once more, wanting to care for her friend and teacher and Savior. It is difficult for me to think that if an angel of God told her where her master was and that he waits for her and the others there, that she would not go and do as she was commissioned. But the thing is, we don't really know. But then we may open our hearts and our minds and think that this abrupt ending actually points beyond itself. That is, meaning that somehow the story did get out, either by the women carrying out their orders, by the angel in the tomb, or by one of the other gospel writers and their detailed ending. A detailed ending. That's really the thing about this story in any of the versions, isn't it? There is no ending. It hasn't ended yet. It is still going on. Jesus is still going on. When asked if he was the king of the Jews, Jesus answered, "I am." Death did nothing to change that. Jesus the man died that day, but Christ has lived and does live on. When I contemplate on this, when I'm preaching to myself on what it means to us now, I ask myself first. And I think of how Easter or Resurrection Sunday is celebrated in other parts of the world. Some Christian traditions put more attention to Jesus' death on the cross and how God's love was exemplified there as God's Son Jesus was given for us. He was given, not as a sacrifice to appease God, for what would that make of God? But as one who took on the sins of the world in an action of love, and not just of the people there that day in Jerusalem in the first century, but those of all places, of all time. And then there are traditions that spend their attention celebrating the loving act of God in raising Christ from the tomb. And I believe personally that I need a balance of both. For there is no resurrection without the cross, and the cross means nothing without the resurrection. But I also believe that we should not spend too much time in either event. I think it is most important to realize the glory of God and Jesus in each of them. And while the other than human of God's creatures may have their own particular ways of praising God that we may not understand, we as human created ones are here to show glory to God in all things that we do, to care for this earth in the way God intended. And God created us in God's own image to do just that. God showed us with his love from the very first, always seeking to have loving relationships with each one of us. And then, when the time was just right, and even though we are still sinners, God's way of interacting with us is showing love by sending his Son, God's self, to us as one of us. And we joyfully celebrate that today. We celebrate the birth, life, teaching, healing, example, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus the Christ, but especially the resurrection today. That miraculous event assures us that even though our bodies will all eventually die, our souls, our spirits will live for eternity because of our faith and belief in him. And a very special way that we do celebrate this is in the sacrament of Holy Communion, or Eucharist. For it was on the very night that Jesus gave himself up for his disciples and for all of us, that he took a loaf of bread, and after giving thanks to God, he took it and he broke it. And then he began to give a piece of it to each one of his friends, his disciples, saying, "Take, eat. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this as oft as you do it in remembrance of me." Likewise, after supper, he took a cup, and after giving thanks to God, he gave it to each one of his friends, his disciples, saying, "Drink from this, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you do it in remembrance of me." See if I can follow my own instructions. Amen. In a moment, we'll be standing to sing our final hymn this morning. And as we prepare to do that, I would like to invite anyone here or out there watching and listening that if they would like to join our church or know more about our church, give me a call, a text, a letter, email. All that information should be there available on Facebook. Or if you'd just like to talk to me during these times, I'd be glad to hear that as well. Or another leader of the church. So at this time, let us stand as we sing.
The
Scotty. It's great. And now let us prepare for our benediction on this Easter Sunday. Let us pray. Dear God, perhaps the greatest joy of today is that there is no end to the story of Jesus. The whole point is that it continues and that its significance continues. Christ's resurrection means that the story of Jesus is to be continued in each of us and in every life that is touched by the power of the good news that says, He is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen. Thank you all for coming. I love you all. Thank you out there.